The key I'd used for 5 years no longer fit the lock. For a full minute, I stood in the drizzle, the metal still wedged stubbornly in the front door of the house I helped buy. Drops of rain clung to my coat, my hair, and my suitcase handle, each one a reminder that I hadn't planned for this. Not emotionally, not practically. I stared at the porch light, glowing like a memory above my head, and tried again. Nothing. I knocked twice, then once more with the side of my fist. Inside, I heard footsteps. The curtain in the front window shifted just slightly, as if someone had peeked through it and changed their mind. Then came the sound of a lock being unlatched, a sigh behind the door. When it opened, my mother's face appeared, not with surprise, but with something closer to weary obligation. "Rachel," she said, "you should have called." She stepped aside to let me in. The smell hit first. New paint, lemon polish, no trace of the lavender I'd grown up with. The living room was different. Brighter, but colder. The couch wasn't where it used to be, and all the framed photos were new. Vanessa in a blazer, Vanessa with a group of coworkers, Vanessa at some awards dinner. My name didn't appear anywhere. I was in the neighborhood, I lied, though Seattle was 1,000 miles from my apartment in LA. Thought I'd stop by. "We weren't expecting you," Dad called from the kitchen. His voice sounded almost strained, like he was trying too hard to sound pleased. "I can tell." Mom forced a smile. "Let me get you a towel. You're soaked." While she disappeared down the hall, I took in the room. My favorite chair was gone. The wall where we'd once hung my college diploma now held an abstract painting I didn't recognize. Even the lamp was new. Sleek, minimalist. Not at all like the heavy ceramic one I'd brought from grad school. I dropped my bag near the stairs and hesitated. For a second, I almost walked up to my old room, but something in my gut told me not to. Dinner was already set. Roast chicken, green beans, and mashed potatoes. The kind of meal Mom only made on holidays or when Vanessa brought over colleagues. No one had mentioned my visit. No extra plate had been placed for me. My mother quietly retrieved one and set it at the far end of the table like I was an afterthought. "So," I said, trying to keep my tone even, "how's everything?" Dad mumbled something about the weather. Mom glanced at Vanessa's empty seat. I was about to ask when she'd be joining us when the front door opened again and she walked in, her heels echoing on the tile, her coat already folded neatly over one arm. "Sorry I'm late," she said, breezing past me without a glance. Meeting ran long. Vanessa had always been poised, but tonight there was something else. Something smug just beneath the surface. She sat at the head of the table and launched immediately into a story about her latest promotion, about overseeing a regional team and possibly being relocated to Chicago. "Though I might hold off on that," she said, buttering a roll. "Since I'm on the title now, I'm thinking about renovating the upstairs first. That bathroom is a disaster." My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. She'd said it so casually, like it was obvious, like it wasn't brand new information. I looked to Dad. He was buttering his own roll. Mom sipped her wine. No one said a word. "I didn't know you were added to the title," I managed. Vanessa looked up. "Oh? Thought you did. Must have slipped our minds." She smiled. I think she expected me to say something. Maybe to protest, maybe to ask why. Instead, I reached for my water glass and realized my hand was shaking. I didn't say a word. I just reached for my water glass and realized my hand was shaking. They remembered Vanessa's favorite cake and new job title. No one remembers I paid the mortgage. The cold light from my laptop screen lit up my living room as I sat cross-legged on the futon, a half-finished glass of wine beside me. Outside, the city hummed. Horns, brakes, distant sirens. But in here, it was quiet enough to hear my own breath. I hadn't planned on spiraling tonight, but spiraling is funny like that. It doesn't ask. The spreadsheet opened automatically. It was one of those files I'd kept too neatly, too long, an archive of should-have-beens, tab by tab, year by year. My mouse hovered over the first line. March 2018, mortgage transfer, $1,200. I clicked it. The comment bubble popped up. First month helping. Should just be temporary. I let out a quiet laugh. Each entry was the same. April, $1,200. May, $1,200. Then inflation came. July, $1,300. Later, $1,400. Sometimes, $1,500. Each row had its own note. Mom said things are tight this month. Vanessa's still job hunting. Dad's health bills stacked up. I remembered every one of those phone calls like chapters in a novel I never got to write. I opened the voice message archive. There they were. My mom's voice, still soft, still guilt-laced even in the recordings. Rach, honey, we just need another month. Just until things smooth out. Vanessa's in a rough spot and your dad's hours got cut. We're so lucky you're doing well. Just don't tell her. She'd be embarrassed. I hadn't told her. I hadn't told anyone. A ping broke the silence. A text from Leah. How was it? I stared at the message for a moment, thumb hovering. Then I typed, they remodeled. Didn't know I wasn't on the title anymore. She called immediately, but I let it go to voicemail. I couldn't talk. Not yet. Back on the spreadsheet, I scrolled further. I'd stopped updating it 6 months ago, mostly out of fatigue. That was the month I canceled autopay. I thought I was being dramatic at the time, taking a stand. But no one noticed. No one called to ask why. I opened the banking app. My heart beat faster, though I wasn't sure what I expected to find. Maybe proof that it was all still in my name. Maybe something that said, you mattered. Under assets, the house wasn't listed. I searched manually. Parcel ID, address, zip code. And there it was. Title ownership. Vanessa Green, sole owner. Updated 6 months ago. My name wasn't even in the history of ownership section. I'd never been formally listed. I stared at it, fingers resting on the keyboard like I might type my way out of this. But what do you type when the betrayal isn't loud? When no one yells, no one steals, just signs forms behind your back? I could picture them. Sitting at the dining table I once picked out, shuffling papers while I was in meetings 1,000 miles away. Vanessa signing. My parents nodding. A notary, maybe. No one thought to call me. Or worse. Maybe they did and decided not to. I whispered it to no one. You knew I wouldn't fight, so you never asked. When did "we're family" become code for "you'll pay and we'll decide"? The question echoed in my head as I stirred my coffee for the 4th time, watching the milk spiral down like hope circling a drain. The cafe was quiet, midweek empty. Just a few students on laptops and an elderly couple sharing a cinnamon roll. I chose a table by the window, not for the view, but for the illusion of distance. If things got awkward, and they would, I could focus on the cars outside instead of my father's face. George Moore arrived 5 minutes late, holding his cup like it might shield him. He smiled the same tight, rehearsed smile he wore at funerals and fundraisers. Not quite sincere, not quite false. Just practiced. Hey, sweetheart. I forced a smile. Thanks for meeting me. He sat across from me, adjusted the sleeve of his jacket, and sipped. How's work? Let's not do small talk today, Dad. I took a breath. Why is Vanessa listed as the owner of the house? He blinked. Once. Then leaned back and let out a breath like I'd asked something childish. She's the one living there, Rachel. You're barely in the state. That wasn't the question. He scratched his temple. Look, you're successful. Traveling all the time. Vanessa needed something stable. A foundation. She's trying to start a family. I felt my knuckles whiten around the cup. And I wasn't? You think I didn't need stability while wiring you money every month? His voice dropped. This doesn't have to be a fight. Then why was I never told? Why did you let me believe the house was mine too? He hesitated. long enough for me to know the answer. We didn't think it mattered. You weren't around. But my money was. Don't twist this. His jaw tightened. It's not about money. Exactly, I shot back. It's about principle. And you knew that. That's why you didn't tell me. A silence fell between us. He glanced out the window, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. Somewhere behind us, a coffee machine hissed. I wanted him to say he regretted it, that it had been a mistake, that they meant to fix it. Anything but what he finally said. You're making this more complicated than it is. I leaned forward. No, you made it complicated the day you chose convenience over honesty. He looked at me, eyes narrowed. Don't make this ugly, Rachel. There it was, the end of the conversation. Not a conclusion, just a shutdown. I watched him gather his coat, stand and nod like we'd discussed something casual. Weekend plans, maybe. As he walked out, I didn't stop him. I just sat there, alone at a coffee shop table, surrounded by warm drinks and cold truths. I kept every receipt, not to prove them wrong, but to remember I did something right. The folder was thick. Not metaphorically. Physically. The paper edges were bent from years of use, the plastic sleeves warped from time and friction. I held it like a lifeline as I stepped into Simon Blake's office, the cool scent of polished wood and lemon cleaner greeting me. His assistant gave me a polite nod, then disappeared behind a frosted glass divider. The office hadn't changed much since our law school networking mixer years ago. Sleek, minimalist, efficient. The only personal touch was a potted bonsai by the window and a worn copy of Bleak House on the bookshelf. I took a seat across from Simon's desk just as he emerged from the hallway, sleeves rolled up, eyes already scanning my file. Rachel, he said with a curt smile. It's been a while. 8 years and some loose change, I replied, trying for casual but hearing the tension in my voice. He gestured to the folder. This is everything? For now. I slid it toward him. Bank statements, wire transfers, tax documents, emails from my mother requesting help, copies of maintenance bills, most paid directly. Simon flipped open the file. His brow furrowed within seconds. You documented all of this? I was raised by people who lose things. I learned to keep records. His lips curled slightly. Not quite amusement. Maybe respect. Maybe pity. Well, it's clear you funded the mortgage. Consistently. And under one condition, the house stayed in the family but legally under my name. Is that documented anywhere? I hesitated. It was verbal, but I have messages from my mom thanking me for keeping the house safe. Simon didn't look up. Courts love text messages. Judges? Less so with sentimentality. I'm not asking them to feel sorry for me, I said. I want to know what can be undone. He glanced up then, eyes sharp. You trusted too much. That's the real wound here. I nodded slowly. And now I want to see if trust broken can be legally binding. Simon leaned back, steepling his fingers. There's a catch. There always is. The title was changed 6 months ago, correct? According to the property database, yes. And you never signed anything? Number nothing. Not an email, not a consent form. Simon tapped the desk. That's where it gets interesting. For a transfer of property rights, especially with pre-existing claims, the notary requirement is strict, even in cases between family. I blinked. So technically, the transfer's not just unfair, it's invalid? Potentially, he said carefully. If we prove the paperwork was incomplete or falsified, the entire title change is null. I exhaled, a small, unsteady breath, one I hadn't allowed myself to take since I learned the truth. But before I could speak, Simon closed the folder, resting a hand on it. But be prepared. If we do this, it's not just paperwork. It's depositions, courtrooms, family members on record. No one walks out clean. I stared at him. I wasn't clean when I walked in. His mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Then he nodded. I'll start by submitting a formal title challenge with the county office. If it sticks, if it sticks, I repeated, the house reverts to me by default. Simon nodded once more, his gaze darkening with something unspoken. A shadow passed through his features, but he said nothing. I wondered briefly what part of him recognized this betrayal so easily. What echo in my story matched one of his? But I didn't press. For now, it was enough that someone finally believed me. Or at least, believed in the receipts. They thought I came to listen. I came to speak. The dining room looked like something out of a magazine. Sunlight filtered through the tall bay windows, scattering patterns across the polished hardwood floor. The table was set with precision. Cream linens, floral plates, a pitcher of mimosas sweating softly beside a tray of croissants. In the center stood a small arrangement of congratulatory cards, all embossed with Vanessa's name. Vanessa beamed like the lead in a rom-com as she poured herself orange juice and said, loud enough for the neighbors to hear, I've already started looking at granite samples. I'm thinking something bold, maybe a dark-veined black for my kitchen counters. Our kitchen, I murmured, but no one heard me over the clink of glasses. Mom, radiant in a pale blue blouse, raised her flute. To Vanessa, resilient, reliable, and finally settling down in the home she deserves. Dad smiled like he'd rehearsed the look. She's earned it. I smiled too, tight, tired, and reached under my coat for the manila folder. The weight of it was familiar now. Paper, yes, but also proof. 5 years of sacrifice packed into 10 sheets. I stood slowly. The room hushed, not out of fear, but confusion. This wasn't in the script. I laid the folder gently on the table between the centerpiece and the basket of scones. Vanessa cocked her head. Is this a brunch speech? I wasn't told we were doing speeches. My voice was calm. I just have something to contribute, since I've been doing that for years. Before she could reply, the doorbell rang. Dad frowned. Who else did you invite? I did, I said. Simon stepped in a moment later, composed and clinical in a navy suit. He nodded to me, then addressed the table like a seasoned surgeon before a delicate procedure. Good morning, I'm Simon Blake, attorney at law. Ms. Rachel Moore has retained my services regarding an ongoing property dispute. Mom's hand froze midair, toast unmade. Dad blinked, lips parting. Vanessa laughed. Oh, come on, she said. You're bringing a lawyer to breakfast? Simon remained unfazed. Ms. Moore has documentation spanning 5 years of mortgage payments, utility costs, and maintenance expenditures, all made under the belief that the property remained in her name. I opened the folder, fanning out the pages carefully. Transfers, letters, a notarized affidavit from my old landlord attesting I'd never lived at the property despite financing it. Then the punchline, a title history showing the ownership transfer made without my notarized consent. Any further modifications to this property? Simon said, voice steady. May constitute legal trespass. Ms. Moore is prepared to file an injunction preventing unauthorized renovations. Vanessa's laughter cracked. Just a little. Enough for her voice to rise a half octave as she stammered, You're joking. This is family. We don't sue each other. I met her eyes. Number. We just erase each other quietly. Mom finally found her voice. Rachel, sweetheart, you could have talked to us. I did, I said softly. For 5 years, I talked with every payment. You listened with your silence. Vanessa's jaw tensed. She looked down at the folder, then back at me. What do you want? Simon glanced at me, but I didn't need prompting. I want what I paid for, I said. And I want to make something clear. I leaned forward slightly, fingers brushing the edge of the folder. You built this dream on my foundation. I'm just reclaiming the ground. No one spoke. For once, they were the ones without a script. Justice doesn't come when you shout. It comes when you document. The office smelled of printer toner and overworked ambition. For the third night in a row, I was sitting on the same vinyl chair across from Simon, my eyes burning from scanning spreadsheets and PDFs. The lights above us buzzed faintly, casting a pale glow over the mess of files, flash drives, and legal pads covering the desk like a paper battlefield. Simon rubbed his temples and exhaled. "You brought everything?" I slid a worn accordion folder toward him. Every bank transfer, screenshots of my texts with Mom, even emails confirming the payment schedule. He whistled low, flipping through the pages. "This is a hell of a paper trail." "I didn't keep it for this," I muttered. "I kept it because I wanted to remember I did something right." He looked at me, something unspoken softening in his eyes, then returned to the pile. "It might be the best decision you ever made." On the second night, I brought a portable scanner and began digitizing everything. Leah had called in briefly, her voice a lifeline. "You okay?" she'd asked. I gave a tired laugh. "Not okay, but I'm finally not pretending." Her silence told me she understood. Simon had set up a comparison between the title transfer and older documents. Mortgage agreements, notarized consents, old family wills. He held 2 pages up to the light like a detective in a crime drama. "See that?" he said. "Look at the slant in the G and George's signature. Here it's curved, but on this, it's sharp, almost mechanical." I leaned in. "You think he didn't sign it?" "Not when this was filed. This document is dated June 10th. My stomach twisted. He was in the hospital then, post-op. He couldn't write, I remember. He could barely lift a spoon. Simon nodded slowly. "So either someone forged it, or someone coached him into scribbling something that could pass. Either way, it's a problem for them." We printed out a third sample, an insurance form from 2 years ago. The signature there matched the older ones. Clean, confident loops. Nothing like the jagged scrawl on the title transfer. Simon didn't say anything for a long time. Then, with a careful breath, he stated, "This could be forgery, Rachel." That changes everything. I stared at the page, heart thudding but strangely calm. There it was. The proof that this wasn't just betrayal. It was theft, plain and cold, and it had been hiding in plain sight all along. The office clock ticked past 11. I closed the file with both hands, fingers trembling, but not from fear. "So if it wasn't even legal," I said quietly, "what am I waiting for?" They painted me greedy. I let them. Until I start showing receipts. The glow of my laptop cast long shadows across my living room wall, dancing with the slow tick of the second hand on the clock above the bookshelf. Midnight again. I hadn't realized how many nights felt like this. Dim, silent, except for the dull hum of my thoughts. I sat cross-legged on the couch, scrolling through Vanessa's latest post. It was a photo of her in the backyard, wine glass in hand, captioned, "Some people value money more than family. Guess we're learning that the hard way." The comments were predictable. "So sorry you're dealing with this. Stay strong, girl. You've always been the responsible one. I can't believe your own sister would sue you." I clicked away from the screen and stared at my reflection in the darkened window. I looked tired, older than I remembered. And yet, beneath the weariness was something else. I wasn't angry. I was ready. The folder sat beside me on the coffee table, neatly arranged. Years of wire transfers, scanned emails, saved voicemails, notarized letters. The life I had funded. The life they erased me from. I hovered my fingers over the keyboard, the blank Facebook status box blinking. I wasn't one for digital wars. But silence was starting to look a lot like surrender. I reached for my phone and snapped a photo of the folder, opened to a page showing 3 bank transfer receipts in a row, each labeled with the same destination, Moore Residence Mortgage Account. I typed slowly, 5 years of silence, not 5 years of absence. No hashtags, no names, just the truth. I hesitated before hitting post. For a heartbeat, I felt a familiar voice whisper, "What if this makes it worse?" But I'd already lived through worse, and that silence nearly buried me. The screen refreshed. Then came the comments. Wait, what's this? Are you saying you paid for the house? That changes everything. I watched them come in one by one. A few doubted me, but others remembered. One woman wrote, I worked with Rachel at the firm. I saw her skip vacations just to cover things at home. She was the only one holding her family together. Don't twist that. My breath caught. It wasn't just the words, it was the validation. For years, I was the ghost in my own story. And now, someone had written me back in. The likes ticked up slowly. Not viral, not loud, but steady. A quiet wave pushing against a shoreline that had once erased every trace of me. I leaned back on the couch, the screen casting soft light onto my face. My heart wasn't racing, but it was warm, calm, steady. I looked at the final comment that had popped up just seconds ago. Sounds like she's just reclaiming what was hers. I blinked, then whispered into the room as if saying it aloud would make it even more real. This is the first time someone said it out loud. I wasn't the only one who gave too much to people who gave nothing back. The rain started sometime after 8. I heard it first in the pause between Simon's sentences. Tiny, nervous taps against the windowpane of his office, like the sky hadn't made up its mind whether to weep or not. We'd been working through paperwork for hours, half-finished takeout containers scattered across the desk, legal forms open and annotated but forgotten. I noticed he hadn't touched his food. You always avoid working weekends, I said softly, not quite asking. Simon didn't answer right away. He pushed his glasses higher on the bridge of his nose, eyes fixed on a corner of the room where the shadows pooled thickest. Weekends are tricky, he finally murmured. I waited. Sometimes silence is a better question than words. He set down his pen. I used to spend them on a farm outside Spokane. My grandfather's land. Big house, endless apple trees. We were supposed to inherit it together. Me and my brother, Nate. The way he said supposed to made my stomach turn. He was always the golden one, Simon continued. Our parents thought he walked on water. I was just the kid with his head in books, the law boy. When Grandpa died, he left the land to both of us, but Nate got there first. Had some papers drawn up. Told me it was just power of attorney stuff. I signed. The pause that followed felt like it cracked the air. He sold it, Simon said, voice flat. Without ever calling me. Cleared the account, bought a boat, then disappeared to Florida for 2 years. I tried to imagine it. Being erased from something you were born into by someone who shared your blood. My breath tightened. Did you sue? I asked, though the answer was already in his face. I didn't. His jaw worked for a second. I was 24, fresh out of law school, and I told myself it wasn't worth the fight. That Grandpa wouldn't have wanted us tearing each other apart. That maybe money doesn't mean anything if family's the cost. Simon looked up at me then, the glint in his eyes not pain, but the memory of it. And I've regretted that silence every day since. Outside, the rain thickened, streaking the windows. I pulled my knees up on the couch, arms wrapped around myself like armor. I know that silence, I said. The kind that pretends it's peace, but it's just grief swallowing its voice. He smiled, sadly, but with recognition. Like we were two musicians finally hearing each other's chords in tune. Helping you, he said, makes me feel like I'm undoing what I never did for myself. The clock on the wall ticked once, then twice. I reached over and closed the folder between us. Not everything that mattered was in those documents. Then let's make sure neither of us walks away this time, I whispered. Simon didn't say anything, but he nodded, once. And in that gesture, the room felt warmer than any verdict. When they feel cornered, they don't apologize. They smear. It started with a headline. Not one from a major outlet, but one of those blogs that thrives on neighborly drama. Local gossip dressed as community news. The title read, Daughter Sues Family Over Ownership. Tears Apart Home. Below it, a photo of Vanessa from last year, cropped to make her look especially wounded, especially noble. I clicked through, and there it was. An anonymous source describing a close relative who gave everything to her sister, only to be sued by her over a miscommunication. The article quoted someone saying, "It's just so sad when money blinds people to love." I didn't have to scroll far to know it was her. Vanessa had always been skilled at twisting the knife in just deep enough. Never bloody, always dressed in silk. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. No greeting. Just, "Can't you just stop all this?" I stared at the screen for a long time. The words weren't cruel, not directly, but in their simplicity, they cut deeper than any headline. No defense of me. No curiosity about why. Just a plea for quiet. Their version of love had always sounded like obedience. That night, I barely touched dinner. I lay on the couch, laptop shut, lights dimmed, mind unraveling every choice that brought me here. Maybe they were right. Maybe this was too much. Maybe fighting for what's mine was just noise. Leah called around 9. I let it ring twice before answering. "I saw it," she said, skipping the hello. "The article. Your mom's text. All of it." I didn't say anything. "Rachel," she continued, "this is what people do when they're losing. They throw dirt, hoping you'll stop digging." Still silence. Then Leah said it. Simple, clear, unshaking. "You don't owe them peace. You owe yourself the truth." Somewhere in that sentence, my spine found itself again. At midnight, an email from Simon landed in my inbox. The subject line, "They blinked." I opened it. Vanessa's interview confirms knowledge of the title transfer. She admits she was aware of some informal funding from Rachel over the years and implies Rachel threatened to take the house back. That's public defamation and a clear statement of intent. They just handed us evidence. I sat up straighter. My blood warmed. They thought painting me greedy would make me disappear. They thought the weight of shame would be heavier than truth. But shame doesn't break people. It builds resolve. I typed back, "We proceed." Then I stood and walked over to the window. Rain streaked down the glass again, softer this time. Behind me, the laptop screen dimmed, but my own resolve didn't flicker. They chose war. I'll bring law. I didn't sleep the night before court, not out of fear, but because I'd rehearsed every answer in my head. The clock on my nightstand blinked 3:14 a.m. in soft red digits. I'd stopped checking hours ago. Sleep wasn't coming. Not tonight. Not with the weight of years pressing against my ribs. I sat at the dining table in a sweatshirt and socks, the lamplight a yellow pool in an otherwise quiet room. Beside me, folders labeled with care, tabs marked in fluorescent blue and orange. Financial records, correspondence, affidavits. Each page carried a truth I had once swallowed. Now I was learning to spit them out. I reread my prepared statement line by line. Not for the first time. Not even the 10th. I wasn't editing anymore. I was memorizing the rhythm, knowing which words would land firm, which needed breath behind them. "Ms. Moore, can you describe your financial involvement in the mortgage?" "Yes. I paid the monthly amount from August 2017 through November 2022. Records enclosed in Exhibit B. Were you made aware of the title change?" Number Y did not consent in writing or verbally to a transfer of ownership. Exhibit F documents the absence of notarized approval. Simon had told me to expect the theatrics. "They will try to frame you as bitter, as unstable. You'll need to be ice, not fire. Let the papers speak." I understood what he meant. This wasn't a war to be won with volume. It was won with clarity. My mind drifted, not to the courtroom, but to smaller theaters. Dinners where Vanessa would dominate conversation while I smiled into my plate. Birthdays when my mother forgot to call. That Christmas when I sent the mortgage payment early so the heating bill wouldn't go unpaid. And no one said thank you. I stood and moved to the closet, flipping through hangers until I found the outfit I'd already chosen. Navy blazer, slate blouse, black pants. No jewelry, no flair, just strength and simplicity. A woman whose facts mattered more than sentiment, because that was always the accusation, wasn't it? You think facts matter more than feelings? My father had once snapped, "You'll learn someday." I did learn. I learned that feelings fade, but signed checks don't. I learned that love without reciprocity is just a leash. And now I was cutting it. By morning, the rain had stopped, leaving the pavement slick and shining. Leah sent a single text. "You've already won. You're just showing your work now." Outside the courthouse, Simon met me with 2 coffees, one black, one with a single cream. He didn't ask how I was, just handed me mine and said, "Let's get this done." We walked through the security check in silence. I held my folders close, like armor. The hall smelled of floor polish and old paper, time frozen in bureaucracy. The courtroom lobby was already filling. I scanned the space automatically, then froze. My parents had just entered. George in a brown jacket, too stiff for his frame. Helen clutched her purse like a lifeline. Neither looked at me. Not even a glance. I didn't expect tears. I didn't expect confrontation. But the emptiness in their faces hit harder than either. Simon leaned in. "They'll sit on the opposite side. That's how it goes." I nodded. Then the clerk stepped out from the double doors, voice clear. "Rachel Moore, case 517 is now in session. ChatGPT Janoi, Toi Ja, Taikachfong, Shu An, Tren Truyen, Hin. Nora, Kachfong, Shu An, Tuksukong, Vang Vong Voi Kong Li, Chung Rong Voi Sukang Thang." The first thing I noticed wasn't the judge or the rows of observers. It was the quiet. Not silence. Just an unnatural, waiting kind of quiet. The kind that held breath. That hummed between heartbeats. That threatened to amplify even the sound of your shoes on the floor. I stepped into the courtroom with Simon at my side, the weight of 5 years of sacrifice organized into labeled binders. Row by row, I could feel eyes. Some curious, some cold. Vanessa sat 2 benches back, composed as ever, legs crossed like she was at brunch instead of civil court. Helen sat beside her, eyes lowered. George, arms folded, looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. I didn't sit with them. I sat at the front, where witnesses go when they're not just telling a story, but proving it. The court clerk called the case number. The judge, a woman in her 60s, alert behind rimless glasses, asked both attorneys to proceed. Simon stood first, methodical and calm, introducing the financial evidence. He walked the court through 5 years of wire transfers, each labeled and verified by my bank. He passed around copies of emails from Mom, thanking me for covering the house this month, and text messages from Vanessa, always vague but expectant. "Ms. Moore," Simon said, "why did you continue to make payments without receiving confirmation of ownership?" I took a breath. Because I trusted that our agreement, verbal or not, was enough within a family. I was wrong. The defense attorney rose, all polished sarcasm and expensive cologne. "Ms. Moore," he began, "do you have any document, any legal contract that explicitly says the home would remain in your name?" "No." He raised an eyebrow. "So you gave money out of goodwill, not as a lender, not as a partner, but as a daughter?" "Yes," I said. "And the agreement was that the house would remain in my name. That was the one condition." He paced. "And yet you never checked the deed?" "I did, eventually. That's why we're here." He smiled tightly, like he'd won something. "Isn't it true, Ms. Moore, that in all those years you never once asked to be added to any official title documentation?" I leaned forward slightly. Because when I did, 2 years ago, my father said, "It's still our house. Not hers. Ours." There was a murmur in the courtroom. The judge raised her hand. Silence fell again. "Let's talk about the title change," she said. "There is no written or notarized consent from you on file, Ms. Moore?" Why is that? I didn't flinch. Because they knew I wouldn't say yes. The words landed without drama, just truth, clean and unforgiving. The judge didn't respond immediately. Her eyes moved across the documents laid before her, then back to the attorneys. We'll reconvene after reviewing the signature exhibits. Her tone was neutral, but her frown wasn't. She didn't bang a gavel. She just stood and exited the room. I stepped down from the stand slowly, my legs suddenly aware of their weight. Simon touched my elbow as I passed, a quiet reassurance. Behind me, I heard Vanessa shift in her seat, but she didn't speak. And for the first time, it didn't matter what she thought. The facts were on record now, and we weren't done. A forged signature doesn't just lie, it confesses. The courtroom was colder today, not in temperature, but in tone. Everything felt sharper. The edges of the bench, the shuffling of papers, the glance Simon gave me before standing again. We had moved past memory and into evidence, past implication and into accusation. Simon approached the podium, file in hand. Your Honor, he began, we would like to call a handwriting expert for brief testimony related to Exhibit H, specifically the notarized signature on the title transfer filed 6 months ago. The judge nodded. The expert, a bespectacled woman with a soft but certain voice, took the stand. She introduced herself, ran through her credentials, 30 years in forensic handwriting analysis, consulted on federal fraud cases. Then she turned to the screen the court technician had prepped. Side-by-side images of George Moore's signature. One from his hospital discharge papers, one from an old tax form, one from the deed transfer. From my seat, the difference was obvious. But it wasn't the loop of a G or the tilt of the M that hit me. It was the absence of pressure. My father's real signatures were firm, deliberate. The one on the deed looked like it was mimicking a shadow. The expert tapped her pen against the screen. The stroke weight is inconsistent. The angularity of the capital letters deviates significantly. This is indicative of non-genuine authorship, possibly traced or fabricated. The courtroom was dead still. Simon nodded. In your professional opinion, is this the signature of the same person? No, she said. It is not. A ripple ran through the audience. I didn't look back to see if my parents reacted. I didn't need to. I could hear Vanessa's voice, low, urgent, hissing into her lawyer's ear. The defense attorney stood, trying to salvage the moment. Your Honor, we request time for our own handwriting analysis. You'll get it, the judge said, but for now, the record will reflect the expert's statement. Simon stepped forward again. His voice didn't rise, but the courtroom leaned in anyway. There is now sufficient basis, he said, to consider the deed modification as fraudulently executed. My client did not consent. The notarization is suspect, and the alleged signer, Mr. Moore, was in post-surgical recovery at the time. He paused. Not for drama, but gravity. We're not just talking about a misunderstanding. We're talking about misrepresentation, about theft masked as family loyalty. Behind me, I heard a gasp. Or maybe it was my own breath catching. For 5 years, I had been the quiet contributor, the one who paid, who yielded, who stayed silent. But silence was never consent. It was containment. The judge looked over her glasses. We will recess for 30 minutes before returning with further instructions regarding document authenticity. And then it happened. As the gavel tapped once, Vanessa stood. Her voice rose, not quite a scream, but louder than it had ever been. She was never supposed to want it back. Everyone turned, every eye. Even the judge stopped mid-step. Vanessa's eyes locked with mine. Furious, shaken, but for once not composed. She said it didn't matter. She let us... Her words tripped over themselves. Her lawyer reached for her arm. But the damage was done. The mask slipped. Simon didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The courtroom had heard enough. I stood slowly, feeling my heartbeat steady for the first time in days. For the first time in years. Let the mask fall. Let the truth rise. And we were only just getting started. Justice doesn't roar. It crumbles. One lie at a time. I arrived at the courthouse early, but still not early enough to avoid the stares. The news had traveled fast after Vanessa's outburst. A few reporters lingered outside, not bold enough to shout questions, but visible enough to be felt. I didn't look at them. I didn't even look at the building. I just focused on each step, one after another, like laying bricks. Inside, the air was different. Gone was the polished posture of a family united by blood. What sat in the benches now were fragments. George with a rigid spine, Helen with her fingers twisted in her lap, Vanessa nowhere to be seen. Simon gave me a quiet nod as I took my seat beside him. The judge addressed the courtroom without preamble. We will now hear testimony from the remaining named parties. First, George. He walked slowly, not because of age, but reluctance. For a man who once managed 6 employees and an entire warehouse, he looked suddenly small in that box. The oath sounded louder when he repeated it. Simon began gently. Mr. Moore, are you aware your signature was used on the deed transfer 6 months ago? George blinked. I was told it was a routine adjustment. For insurance. That it didn't really matter. And who told you that? He hesitated. Then, Vanessa. A whisper rippled through the gallery. Simon leaned forward. Did you at any point discuss the title transfer with Rachel? George shook his head. Number I figured she wouldn't care. Silence. The judge looked up. Why? He swallowed. Because Rachel never wanted. She didn't want kids, or a traditional family. Vanessa did. She was building something. I thought, if we put the house in her name, it'd help her settle down. I didn't think. He paused, voice cracking. I didn't think Rachel would care about legacy. I didn't flinch. Not even a blink. But inside I felt the crack widen. Not where the betrayal sat, but where the assumption lived. That my value was measured by how closely I followed their idea of building a life. Helen was next. She moved as if her bones had betrayed her. Once so sharp in posture, so crisp in gesture. Today she looked dulled, folded inward. Simon didn't speak first. The judge did. Mrs. Moore, were you aware that your daughter's name had been removed from the property title? She nodded, barely. Why did you not inform her? Helen whispered, I just wanted peace. There was always tension when we talked about money. Rachel, she always did the right thing. I didn't want her to feel obligated. Simon's voice was soft. So you let her keep paying. A nod again. And you let Vanessa claim it. Helen didn't answer. Not out loud. Just a breath. A soundless, shaking breath. The courtroom didn't need shouting. Didn't need fists or flared voices. This was something more devastating. The quiet collapse of a lie carefully maintained for years. Not a singular event, but a slow erosion. And we had reached the final crack. The judge's words came steady, measured. Given current evidence and testimony, the case will proceed to final ruling. The plaintiff's ownership claim stands, pending document verification and record reconciliation. Simon didn't move. Neither did I. I turned just slightly, catching the last sliver of Vanessa's retreating form as she pushed through the doors, jaw clenched, eyes burning. But she didn't look back. When the session ended, people filed out in silence. No congratulations, no applause. Just the sound of footsteps echoing what had broken between us. On the exterior steps of the courthouse, Simon stood beside me holding a folded piece of paper, the judge's notice. We didn't speak for a long moment. Finally, he said it, not with pity, just fact. We may win, but the family you knew is gone. I didn't cry. I breathed. And for once, that was enough. The house wasn't mine yet, but my peace finally was. Morning sunlight spilled across my kitchen table. soft and golden. A chipped mug of jasmine tea steamed beside a half-filled notebook. For once, the page wasn't a list of case notes or court quotes. Just thoughts. Scattered, unforced. Mine. My new apartment didn't have crown molding or a view of the bay. The cabinets creaked. The floor had a dip near the couch. But every square inch answered to me. I picked the rug. I chose the clock. I locked the door at night and unlocked it in the morning, knowing no one had touched the latch but me. There were no more envelopes marked urgent from Simon. No folders cluttering the dining table. Just silence. And not the empty kind, but the healing kind. Leah stopped by that afternoon with 2 pastries and a glint in her eye. "You look lighter," she said, handing me one without asking. I smiled. "Lighter than 5 years of mortgage and betrayal?" "Yeah, probably." She tapped her cup to mine. "You didn't win money, Rachel. You won clarity. That's rarer." I nodded. And quieter. We talked about books, about a podcast she thought I'd like. We didn't mention Vanessa or the courtroom or the silence that followed it all. Just the normal things friends say when the dust has finally settled. When Leah left, I lingered in the doorway for a minute longer than I needed to. The sky was just beginning to turn, warm light falling through the branches of a tree I couldn't name but now saw every morning. Simon stopped by later that evening, briefcase in hand, face unreadable. "The judge signed off," he said, offering a manila envelope. "Vanessa didn't appeal. Titles reversed." I opened the flap slowly, not because I needed to see the words, but because part of me didn't quite believe peace could come in something as thin as paper. "Thank you," I said. He paused, his voice softer. "You sure you're okay?" I nodded. I don't need them to understand. I just needed it to be over. Simon hesitated a moment, then smiled. Genuine, tired, maybe even a little proud. "I'm glad you fought." "So am I." When he left, I reached into a box I hadn't opened in weeks. Inside was a faded photo. The house, sunlit and perfect. Vanessa standing in front, hands on hips, the porch light behind her like a crown. I stared at it for a long moment, then lit a match. The flames licked the edges before curling inward, devouring paint and smiles and the illusion that family always meant fairness. It wasn't anger, just release. I watched it burn in a shallow dish, then ran water over the ashes until they washed away. As I wiped the sink clean, my phone buzzed. Unknown number, 1 line. "If you ever want to talk, Dad." I stared at it, unmoving, then turned the screen face down. The tea had gone cold, but the quiet, it was still warm. It wasn't about the house. It was about finally being seen. The morning light streamed through gauzy curtains, soft and golden, touching everything with quiet approval. It found the edge of my writing desk, the lip of a chipped teacup, the frame of the mirror that had traveled with me through 4 apartments and just as many heartbreaks. I wrapped the shawl tighter around my shoulders and turned the final page in the envelope Simon had sent 2 days ago. It was there. My name. Clean and alone, written in crisp black ink across the top of the official deed. Rachel Marie Moore. No co-signers, no as trustee, no et al. Just me. I set the papers down with a reverence usually reserved for holy things. It didn't feel like revenge. It didn't even feel like triumph. It felt like exhale. Like that first breath after surfacing from too long underwater. The room was still, save for the rustle of curtains in the breeze. My old wooden floor creaked under bare feet as I walked to the bookshelf, reached for a small velvet box, and opened it. Inside was the very first receipt. $1,200 wired to a joint account titled Moore Household. Dated 5 years ago, back when I thought a few months of help would lead to gratitude, not erasure. I smiled at that girl in my memory. Nervous, hopeful, wearing confidence like a coat slightly too big for her shoulders. She hadn't known then how much it would cost her to be generous, but she had done it anyway. I stood in front of the mirror, the receipt pressed gently to my chest. My reflection looked back. Older, yes, but not broken. Not even bitter. Just returned. That girl saved herself, I whispered. The phone buzzed on the counter. Leah's name lit up the screen. Morning, she said, bright as ever. Lunch today? I paused for a second, just enough to register the weightlessness in my voice when I replied, I'll be there, finally. We chatted for a minute, mostly about the weather and whether we should try that new place with the rooftop seating. Nothing about Court or Vanessa or even the house. Just today. Just life. After I hung up, I pulled open a drawer and found the frame I'd bought but never used. I slipped the deed inside it, smoothing out the corners, wiping away a stray speck of dust. Then I walked it over to the wall, a spot across from the window where the morning light always touched first. I didn't hang it for show. I hung it for proof. Private, quiet, and sacred. Proof that I had done something hard and done it alone. That I hadn't disappeared, even when they tried. That names on paper might have been taken, but identity? Dignity? Not this time. I glanced at the clock. Lunch in 40 minutes. I grabbed my keys from the hook, keys that matched the lock finally, and slung my bag over my shoulder. No looking back. No need to. I closed the door behind me. It clicked shut with the calm certainty of someone who no longer had anything to prove. Outside, the sun was warm. The day was mine. And so was everything that came next. She walked away from the courtroom not as a daughter nor a sister, but as a woman who chose justice over silence. The house might have been the battlefield, but the war was never about walls or square footage. It was about visibility, dignity, the right to be counted. For 5 years, Rachel paid for a home she was quietly erased from. And when she asked for fairness, they gave her shame. But piece by piece, through silence, proof, and unwavering resolve, she built something stronger than family. The truth. What they never expected was that her quietest documents would speak louder than their loudest lies. Because justice doesn't always arrive in thunder. It arrives in order, in facts, in one unflinching woman holding her receipts. In a world that teaches people, especially women, to tolerate, to compromise, to endure for the sake of peace, stories like this remind us, peace built on suppression is just a slower war. Sometimes the only way to heal is to confront. And sometimes the person you need to save is yourself. Like the final chord of a long-forgotten melody, justice may arrive late, but it resonates powerfully once it's heard. When injustice is met with unwavering courage, the final verdict can echo through a lifetime. So if you've ever felt small in a room you paid to stand in, remember her. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. So if you've ever been pushed aside, underestimated, or erased, remember this. Silence may keep the peace, but only truth rewrites the story. Like if you believe justice must be fought for. Share if you've ever stayed silent when you should have spoken. Subscribe for more stories where truth wins. Comment 1 if this story resonated with you. Comment 2 if you feel something was missing, and tell us why.